Clifford Olson will ask a jury to grant him the right to appeal for early parole. Olson is using Section 745 of the Criminal Code, so-called faint hope provision, to win his day in court. And it will be a memorable day. Olson will sit in a special plexiglass cage. The cage will protect spectators from him, but it's also intended to protect Olson. And that's what some critics say is the problem. Too much time and effort is being spent protecting the criminal and not enough on the victim. But defenders of the system say Olson is the exception, and if we make law based on exceptions, it's bound to be bad law. So let's take another less infamous case that came up just last week. 7 years ago, Lou Nippert attacked and stabbed his wife 33 times. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole for 12 years. But on Thursday, he got his first parole hearing. Outside of the hearing, protesters gathered to support his victim, Nellie Nippert. She had traveled to Moncton, New Brunswick from Newfoundland for the hearing, but she had no right to testify or appear before the parole board.
From the day that he stabbed me, I was the victim, but I didn't have any rights, and it's been that way ever since.
In the end, Lou Nippert was denied parole. He will stay in jail until his next hearing in 1999, when the whole process will begin again. Joining us now from her office in Toronto is defense lawyer Karen McArthur. Karen, welcome back to the program.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Oh, not too badly. Why shouldn't victims of violent crime have their say at parole hearings for criminals?
Why shouldn't they have their say? Well, they certainly have an opportunity at the trial proper in the sentencing phase to give their input into how the crime has affected them. But I think if victims have their say too much so at the parole stage, they will polarize the process and the focus will be simply on retribution and vengeance. Victims are not really properly placed to ascertain whether or not a convicted offender is ready to go back into the community. They don't have the expertise and their hearts are in it.
All right, just as an ordinary citizen, what would you say to the people who find themselves in the category of being victims when they claim we've forgotten about their rights and their part in the justice system?
I would say that they too could someday, or a member of their family, be an accused person on trial, and they must remember that the system has developed over centuries to be fair and to pay due heed to what we call due process, so that they should be mindful of that. And they also should reflect that way back when we started trying to separate the bad from the good, that the victims were involved in the process. They were chosen to be on the jury along with eyewitnesses to the crime. And they discarded that idea in the 10th century because it didn't work, it wasn't fair, and people were wrongfully convicted. Even with all the changes that we've made in the system, we still have mistakes. David Milgaard, that's our newest mistake. We now know it's a mistake.
Donald Marshall, too.
Guy Paul Moran. That's what we have to say to victims, is the system has developed to be fair. And someday, God forbid, you could be an accused person or a member of your family. So let's try to keep it fair.
All right, Karen, you're an insider who knows the system better than most average citizens. Is there any part of you, in watching how that system operates, that suspects at times that we focus too much on the rights of the criminal? And I'm talking now about degree, not the issue of whether they should get any concern regarding the system.
That's a complicated question. Have I ever felt that as an insider? I think, in all honesty, I haven't. What I perhaps have thought is that there's a big emphasis on categorizing offenders and accused persons that takes away from the individual approach, which I think would work better. Does that answer your question, or?
That does answer my question. What, in your opinion, do we need early parole for anyway? After all, judges hand down sentences, they're highly trained people. Why shouldn't criminals serve their whole sentences the way that juries expect that they will?
Well, first off, judges hand down sentences with keeping in mind the provisions of the criminal code that set out and the panoply of the parole system, keeping in mind that most of them are released after the 1/3 or 2/3 marks, depending on how they're faring in the system. So they sentence accordingly. They give someone a 10-year sentence knowing that in all likelihood they will be out after the 2/3 mark. Were the change that many people are advocating to come into place, judges would simply shorten their sentences. And what the community would be met with is people being released without any form of supervision and without having sort of taking a step-by-step way to reintegrating into the community. If you just chuck away the idea of parole and let people walk out the doors of the penitentiary without any system in place, in all likelihood, their contacts with their community, their contacts with their family, and their belief in the community, and the hope, that spark that you got to keep alive in a human being in order to have any prospect of them being a good citizen, will likely have been vanquished, burnt right out.
Do you think that there is any obligation on the judicial system to reflect mainstream thinking? And I'm thinking particularly, there seems to have been a right turn in society when it comes to law and order issues. Do you think that legislators, the courts, and even the prison system has any obligation to get in step with that thinking, get tough on crime and criminals? Or do you think that that, in effect, will make the situation, which a lot of people think is terrible, even worse?
Should our legislators and our justice officials be keenly in tune with sort of the changing vicissitudes of political opinion? I don't think so. I think that we have put legislators and we have put justice officials in the positions that they're in because we hope, fervently hope, that they will take a look at the sociological research, they will take a look at the psychiatric research, and try to determine what is the just and appropriate solution as opposed to what is the politically expedient and perhaps cost-efficient solution. And there is a great deal of focus. Criminology programs are growing. Psychology programs are focusing in on what separates good from bad. Is it biological? Is it cultural? Is it economic? And this right-wing turn, as you call it, Michael, is not, in my view, of things taking a look at what our universities are putting out in terms of the solid research.
Karen McArthur, I know you're involved in a big case there in Toronto with the Just Desserts murder. We really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael.